Good afternoon, buenas tardes, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual afternoon with A.K. Blakemore to discuss The Manningtree Witches, published by our friends at Catapult Books. Wolf Hall meets the favorite in this beguiling debut novel that brilliantly brings to life the residents of a small English town in the grip of the 17th century witch trials and the young woman tasked with saving them all from themselves. A.K. Blakemore is the author of two collections of poetry, Humbert Summer and Fondue. She has also translated the work of Sichuanese poet Yu Yo-yo. Her poetry and prose writing have been widely published and anthologized, appearing in the London Review of Books, Poetry, the Poetry Review, and the White Review, among other publications. To moderate this afternoon's conversation, we're joined by Amy Key. Amy is a poet and writer based in London. She is the author of two collections of poetry, Lux and Isn't Forever, which was a Poetry Book Society wildcard choice, and a Book of the Year in The Guardian, New Statesman, Times, and Irish Times. Her first work of nonfiction, Arrangements in Blue, will be published in the US in the spring of 2023. Throughout this afternoon's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of The Manningtree Witches from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. You'll be supporting our independent bookstore, and we truly appreciate it. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
You're very welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Amy.
And I'm AK. But it's confusing, so we're both Amy, really.
Today I'm going to call you AK, if that's all right with you. I'm going to designate your official author title. So it gives me lots
My
of
dad called me AK.
Really?
Yeah. My own father has started calling me by my nom de plume. It's funny though. I think he was being sarcastic, but yeah, it's like this has gone too far. I'm no longer Amy.
Right, so it gives me a lot of pleasure to host this conversation with you today, AK. For the benefit of people who've tuned in, AK and I know each other as poets. We met as poets in London. But over time, she's become a kind of magical person in my life because we've become close friends, but also because I'm a big fan of her writing. And I always think it's interesting when you have a friend that you're also a fan of, that you're eagerly awaiting the release of their next text. And obviously, I originally knew AK's writing, poetry, and I just find it very kind of hot and surprising. It's like a sudden mood changes, and it's very intimate, but it's also fiercely clever. And I think what runs through her poetry is the knowing of somebody who understands how power is claimed and denied. So when she told me she was writing a novel, I was so eager to read it and see how the hallmarks of her poetics might find their way into her prose. And I read an early chapter of The Manningtree Witches, and within a few sentences, I knew it was going to be a brilliant novel. There's an image from the end of the, don't be embarrassed. There's from the end of the first chapter, which is stuck in my mind ever since. And it's of a hen as in like a, I don't know if my accent is helping, but a female chicken, a a hen, taking a considered step, her head held askew like a woman in marvellous skirts, stopping to check the tread of her boot for a stone. And as someone who writes poetry, I'm often quite put off by the poetic image in a novel. But the turning over of that incredibly vivid image in my mind was more evidence than I ever needed that AK's poetic skill had transferred into her prose, and the Manningtree Witches would be an electric read. So if I haven't made you want to squirm and die, I want to kind of just warm up by asking you how you are, what's been going on for you today, and then we can get into talking about the book.
So the reason I am in my pajamas wearing no makeup and have like greasy kind of Harry Potter forehair is because I have moved house today, or I've done kind of the second half of a house move today, which involved taking my cat in a zip car across the city through the Blackwall Tunnel, which is a tunnel that runs under the River Thames and is horrible for human beings and for cats. I don't know, they probably thought they were dying. So it's been incredibly stressful, but I'm here now and I'm having a coffee. I forgot to pack the kettle, so it's a coffee made from water warmed on the hob and poured into the mug with a ladle. Yeah, that's what's been going on for me. But it's a lovely way to end an incredibly high-key day with Amy. That really wasn't intentional. It happened. Yeah.
Well, when I woke up this morning, I opened the curtains and there was the wing of a pigeon covered in slugs on the grass outside. And I thought, what kind of terrible omen is this? And that feels like a kind of rich thought to have when thinking about your book.
Wow. I was going to say it's like a real AK Blakemore question, but do slugs eat flesh?
I don't know, but they were really enjoying these feathers. It was a feathered wing, you know, so there wasn't, it was it wasn't pleasant. And throughout the day, the wing has moved to various parts of the grass outside my window, clearly picked up by a cat. Anyway, I think I've been long enough with digressions, and I'm sure people would really love to hear you read a little from the book. So could you maybe start by giving us a short reading and then we can have a chat?
Yeah. So I'm just going to read a very short section from towards the beginning of the book, which is kind of, I suppose, a scene setting sort of segment. And so the Manningtree Witches is about, or partially, I guess, about the career of a figure who in England was known as the Witchfinder General. I don't know how kind of widely known he would be in America. I mean, he's not particularly even widely known here, but at the time he was a sort of a Puritan celebrity, I suppose you could say. And he innovated many techniques for the detection of so-called witches. He started his career during the English Civil War in Manningtree, a small town in Essex, which obviously is in the title of the book. So this little section is, I suppose it sort of takes place not long after Matthew Hopkins's arrival in Manningtree. Parliament secures a victory over the king in Berkshire against long odds, prompting a confused atmosphere of Dog Days Carnival across the villages and hamlets of Essex, the men drinking and firing their muskets off into the lilac dusk, for God's judgment is surely passed upon the unrighteous.
I think she froze. right?
Yeah, that's such a shame. So I know that AK is using public Wi-Fi because she's just moved and doesn't have it.
So what I feel we should probably do is just let me close out her video and try to get her back in. Okay?
Oh, great.
Bear with me for a second. We're gonna do this. Let's see. I'll pop back in so you're not alone. Just waiting. Okay. Let's give her a minute because she may not even realize. Hang on. I'm also going to open the chat in case she needs to.
I'll send her a message.
That would be great. She doesn't seem to be accepting the invitation to come back in. So if you can text
She's
her,
trying
that would
to
be.
get back on.
She's trying to get back on. Okay, good.
I think this is indicative of the kind of day she's had so far.
Oh my God. We just have to, just do our best. This is not perfect. So I wonder why she's not able to get back on, even though I've prompted her a couple of times. Let me see. Let's start again. Has she texted you anything back?
She just says, shall I call her?
Yeah, she might want to. I think she just tell her she just needs to go through the same steps that she did the first time. Like maybe re-enter her email.
Hello. Christina says all you need to do is go through the same steps you went through before. So you click on the link in the email, it should work.
Okay, sorry, it's just my Wi-Fi.
Oh dear.
I'm still trying.
Oh, could you don't worry, can you toggle on your phone?
Yeah, I could
Give that a go. All right, love. Don't worry. Okay, bye. Okay.
So her Wi-Fi is not responding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe she'll be able to just connect via her phone.
We'll get her on. I mean, it's such a great book. We want to hear her talk about it. Thank you to everyone who's watching, and thanks for your patience.
I think we've all been either on this end of the IT or Amy's end, and it's pretty excruciating when it happens to you, isn't it?
It is. I mean, we're lucky. We've talked about this a lot with writers. It's just how lucky are we that we can even do this,
Oh, yeah.
The quality of the conversations has been amazing. I mean, the fact it would be really hard to get you both to Miami from England.
I mean, we would probably love that, but I think that, having the accessibility for so many more people to take part in events and attend events, and, I know that for disabled people in particular, this has been so brilliant. And think we need to make sure that it continues as part of like the practice of events in future, as much as in-person events are lovely.
So someone in the audience is asking, Amy, if you can talk about the book while we wait.
I can try.
Here she is.
I'm so sorry.
There you are.
We don't have broadband properly sorted yet, so yeah, I'm really sorry. But now here I am.
To a very unusual day. In
Yes,
general. Okay, I'm gonna disappear now, and you can go right back to where you were.
Thanks.
Should I just pick up on the read from the reading?
Start. Yeah.
Matthew Hopkins rides his horse through a field at dawn and notices a black feather lying in the grass, glossy and ideal. Matthew Hopkins hosts. Matthew Hopkins expounds. Matthew Hopkins discourses, the town's foremost autodidacts groping for each morsel of his exultant theology. For he is, of course, a prince of air, says Hopkins, lifting the edge of his riding cloak in such a way that his learned companions might better appreciate the broidery of the hem, the sleekness of the sable. And it makes sense to them then, when he puts it like that, how the devil might thicken like butter and slide under the pantry door to cover a man all over, a man or a woman. They can imagine the devil there, some great thing in the sky, or as a mist rolling in off the river, gathering the smoke of scullery fires to himself for later use, or as the miasma that hovers over the marshes and flats, bringing the ague, a dark head crowned in slender red leaves of narrow dock, a moth with mouths for both front and back, cavorting in the autumn clouds that are like strips of flayed skin. The devil minces and the devil dances. He dances like a girl might, slender hipped, hair falling wild around her shoulders, inflamed. Now the nights grow longer, he might go from door to door of an evening in the guise of a swarthy peddler, opening his coat to the wide-eyed goodwives and maids, and where there ought to be bobbins of silk ribbon and little pearl buttons, he shows to them his merchandise of sootkin and smooth meat. This one here's prick ear, and this one pretty man, and all the while a grey cat watches from the strawberry patch.
One thing I thought about when I reread that passage was just the tremendous swagger of Matthew Hopkins, that, you know, the vanity of him, and how that was like put in service of this pursuit of, you know, running out of the devil, and how like queerly erotic it is as well. There's a kind of sexiness, but we'll come on to that a bit later because I want to ask about that. But could I start by asking you what drew you to the story of the witch trials?
So I guess, you know, we don't really perhaps have a relationship with our witch trial history in quite the same way as maybe America does with Salem. It's very much kind of little known history in England, but obviously, you know, witch hunting began in Europe. And so the Essex witch hunts were about 40 years before Salem. And in many ways, it was the same profile of people who were doing, you know, who were doing both. So it was the Essex Puritans who became the sort of early settler population of parts of the East Coast of America. So there's a kind of continuity there, just to kind of situate any, you know, American watchers within that history. And I was aware of the Witchfinder General, Matthew Hopkins, as a figure, but almost a sort of cartoon. I suppose he's a bit similar to Jack the Ripper in English culture, as this sort of someone we know did very horrible things, mainly to women, but they're more of a cartoon character, like people make horror films about them, rather than a figure from our history who is ever really interrogated with particular seriousness.
Mhm.
You know, there's a 60s horror film where he's played by Vincent Price, sort of thing. So I kind of started to dig more into the history because my dad lives in Manningtree. So I'm up there kind of a few times a year, and it's a very, very small. It's the smallest town in England that still counts as a town officially. Sort of that's its Guinness Book of World Records type thing, and nothing really has ever happened in Manningtree apart from the witch hunts, really, or you know, that's the sense you get. So it's the one sort of aspect of local history that has, to some extent, national fame. Matthew Hopkins. So much so that there's a sign on the way into the village with a woodcut of Matthew Hopkins on it, which is kind of insane when you consider that he murdered about 300 women. You know, it's not really something to be proud of. So I was interested. No, I was interested in that, I guess, or that was what drew me into the story. This kind of disconnect between the way Matthew Hopkins is viewed in wider, you know, outside of sort of specialist historian thinking. Yeah. And then I started reading kind of contemporary records of the witch trials, and they are just, they're really astonishing documents, like down to the way these people arrange their thoughts, the way they put things. Like they, you know, these women, they express themselves in quite poetic ways. So I was very drawn to the language and the imagery of these trial documents. And I thought it was astonishing that of all the sort of cultural presentations of Matthew Hopkins and English witch trials, none of them seemed to me to actually draw on the historical record of the actual women who were accused. So I knew from the outset what I set out to do was stay as closely to the history as it is presented to us as I could. No, I didn't want to make up a new character, or, you know. So that was kind of my way in, I guess. Long answer.
There's a line that I really love from later on in the book where Rebecca West talks about, she says, I can tell by the way he by the way is Matthew Hopkins, looks at me then that he has never heard a woman reason a thing out before, certainly not a woman like me. And that for me is such an important thing in your book, the dignity that you give the working class, the poor, the old women who are persecuted as witches in your story. And even though you talk of I don't know, their stink and their smell and everything that we find shameful about women's bodies and women's actions, that they're given this tremendous attention and tremendous dignity. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the importance of the women's story.
Yeah, I hope, I'm glad it comes, you know, that it comes across, because it was very important to me that they did retain dignity. And I think another bitching about witch trial narratives generally, but I think one of the problems I've had with other cultural products that engage with witch hunts and witch trials is the tendency for them to turn into torture porn, essentially. Catalogues of horrible things being done to women's bodies without any proper politics or thought or seeming points to it. It's sort of, oh, here I am reading about women being hung, and you know, but why? We all knew the witch trial. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't play into that tendency, and one of the best ways to do it, it felt to me, was to make sure the female characters felt like people and not kind of ciphers for misogyny to be poured onto. And I also, so it's interesting to me, not always in a positive way, the way that, like, obviously there's been amazing work, you know, done from the 60s onwards about sort of feminist and Marxist understandings of witch hunts. Sylvia Federici is, you know, obviously her work is sort of the prime example of that. But there's also a kind of another stream of, I guess, what you could call sort of feminist claiming of the witch as a figure and as a symbol. And sometimes it can make me a bit uncomfortable, sort of we are the daughters of the witches, you could not burn stuff, because it very often seems predicated on ignoring the fact that obviously, you know, that misogyny was a driving force here, but there was so much more in, you know, intersectionality to it. The vast majority of women who were accused as witches were very old, or you know, older, past childbearing years. Very many of them were disabled, visibly or otherwise, and the vast majority were poor. The fact that they didn't have the protection of money was usually the thing that made the difference. So I think witch trials, to me, in some ways, are more interesting not in what they say to us about misogyny, which is kind of something we all know in many ways, but what they say more broadly about the processes by which people are othered. Any people, poor people, refugees, and that was sort of, I suppose, what I wanted to foreground. Like, I wanted it to be very clear in the book that it's not a case that, oh, any woman could have been accused of being a witch. It was very much specific types of women who, for, you know, for various reasons, were more open to the kind of othering and dehumanizing that needs to take place within a community for that level of violence to be acted against her. So that was, I guess, something I was quite conscious of when I was writing it. That, you know, it's not that any woman could have been accused of being a witch. Like, there are some women that would just never happen to. And what's the difference between those women and the ones it did happen to? A long answer again, but it's something I have a lot of thoughts about. And there was, you know, it's great that almost the witch trial novel is sort of a subgenre of historical fiction within itself now. But I guess there were things I knew I wanted to do differently from witch trial narratives I'd read before, and that was one of them, to foreground class in that way. Yeah,
and I've been really pleased when I've read reviews of your book. So there was one today, I think, in the LA Review of Books, where what I've seen is when people have commented on it is people have got a slight prejudice about people who are experts in witches, witchcraft, you know, nervous when they see, you know, a cultural product that is a book about with witch trials, and they've really praised and commended what you've done with the story, which isn't in this kind of commodification of witchiness. It is very much telling that story of women who've been othered and punished punished for it.
I hope so. I hope so. I also, it's weird because it seems to have, it produces various reactions that, you know, kind of something we have, I guess, going into a witch trial novel, a bit like going into a film about Titanic, say the film Titanic, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
We know how it works, and we know the consequences it had. And for some people have told me that, like, oh, I don't really like reading witch trial novels because either what I think is going to happen happens and it's really depressing, or they somehow defy the odds and historical accuracy and you know, survive, and they're clambering out of towers and running across fields on white chargers while 8 months pregnant and things like that. And I don't like that either, which I thought was interesting. And it's sort of a bit of a bind for you as a novelist, because you know, what do you do? But I hope I kind of I walked. It's quite grim, basically, but I think the ending is sort of hopeful. I don't know, or it's leavened with humor. But I knew I wanted to sort of try and find a third route through that bind.
It has like loads of great, you know, quite salty humor. But I think I mentioned this earlier. The other thing is that it's got, for me, like quite an erotic charge. There's something for all of like the grime and the bleak. You know, you don't portray a bucolic England. It's sort of grey and misty and rainy and muddy, and there are clods everywhere. But there is something quite sexy about and some of it is in the kind of femininity of that you ascribe to the landscape. You know, you've got Harwich, which is a port in England, which what is she doing? She raises her, she's on is her haunch or her flank? I can't quite remember, but you know, you're sort of imagining a kind of woman lying on her side with a hip jutting, and you've got rivers that are throats, and you've got waves that are, you know, an arching back, and there's something very sensual about the way you talk about the landscape. But it's very kind of delicately done. But yeah, I wondered if you could talk a bit about your intention in bringing some of that into the writing.
Yeah. So I suppose within kind of in witchcraft and occultism, obviously the things that are frightening about witches in concept is their sexuality. You know, that's the obvious one. You know, Goody Preston came into my bedroom last night. It's the way they become these sort of pariahs of a community's suppressed sexuality. You know, that's a tale as old as Arthur Miller. So, you know, kind of, I suppose every witch narrative has that sort of sexuality embedded within it. And also another thing that is scary about the witch is that she blurs the boundaries between the human world and the natural world, by transforming into an animal, by evoking the elements. You know, her magic, or at least in the early modern understanding of a witch's magic, was that it was natural. And so kind of, I suppose the connection, that was sort of why I wanted to bring in a sort of sensuality into the descriptions of landscape, But also, I read, so Matthew Hopkins, the Witchfinder General, did publish a book the year he died, outlining his sort of his Matthew Hopkins' Guide to Finding Witches, The Discovery of Witches, which was published in 1647. And one of the things that is really fascinating about this book is just the unbridled sensuality of it itself. He was a Puritan, but so this is an extract from the book that Matthew Hopkins wrote. Then they all consult with Satan to save themselves, and Satan stands ready prepared with a "What will you have me do for you, my near and dearest children? Covenanted and compacted with me in my hellish league, and sealed with your blood, my delicate firebrand darlings." Delicate firebrand darlings. That's just like an astonishing phrase all round. But that it's from a book by a 26-year-old Puritan man, is kind of astonishing. And I didn't want to go down the obvious route of ascribing Hopkins's motivations just to some sort of twisted sexuality, because I think that's a really obvious way of doing it. And I felt like that had been overdone before. But it did feel impossible to ignore when studying the character of Hopkins that his obsession with witchcraft, that level of obsession you have to make it into your career, killing people. And sort of the way he puts it in his own writing, like the dimensions of his obsession with witchcraft felt very sexual. Like it was like a sort of pseudo-sexual obsession for him in a way that's quite clear. And, you know, without wanting to ever imply that that was all it was about.
It's that kind of feverish intensity.
Yeah. And I wanted to capture that in the book. And also, sort of one of the things that's fascinating about this, you know, this history generally, but this period of history as well, which was, you know, when we say the word Puritan now, we use it as shorthand for it's sexual repressive, essentially, right? If you say someone's a Puritan. And what I found particularly interesting was when writing it was, obviously sex desire has always existed. And people have managed it in sexually repressive societies however they felt they could. But it never goes away. Communities are never free of it. It's something that simmers along in the background, no matter how you try to control or bridle it. And I suppose I wanted to kind of speak to that in the texture of the writing. That in this very straight-laced, puritanical, literally, community, there was still crushes being formed and simmering wants, and
that has to come out in the language that you choose in the book, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I suppose I wanted to kind of to gesture at that sort of sensuality throughout. Yeah.
So I know that we need to have time for questions, and so I come to like my last question, and then I'm going to ask if you could finish by reading another short section of the book. So as you know, you would have gathered from the introduction, both Amy, AK, and I met through poetry, and I know you best as a poet, and I wondered if you could talk a bit before you read about how your kind of poetic sensibilities inform the writing of this novel, and because I pick it up on every page, but it would be great to just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. It's a weird one because I feel like the trend in prose writing now, and I mean has been for a long time, is toward minimalism, right? That that James Baldwin thing of the aim being to write a sentence as clean and white as a bone, something like that. And that's not my natural instinct anyway. And I'm sorry, James Baldwin, you were right about almost everything, but I disagree with you on this. Like, my natural tendencies in writing are maximalist. I want adornment and sparkle and kind of tint and smell, and all those things. So I think that kind of comes from being a poet first and foremost. And I also, I mean, I don't know if other poets also feel this way, but I feel like the way I compose scenes in my head is almost kind of like cinematic. Like, I think of it as a scene in a film, and then describe from there. And I feel like that tendency is something that started from writing poetry. So I suppose those are kind of two material ways. I think the fact that I perhaps have more of a poet's imagination than a prose writer's imagination, in the way I understand them.
Get the sense that like all of your senses are on the page when you're creating a scene. It's very so talking about it being cinematic isn't surprising to me. Well, thank you for indulging my questions.
Thank you for asking them.
Would you mind just kind of closing off this section with another reading, and then we'll hand back to Christine.
So this is a section from later in the book, and it's from a witch trial. And it's sort of one of the sections of the book that is a bit more like poetry and a bit less like prose, because I had a very lovely editors who let me do that. So I'm going to read it quite fast and in quite a sort of abrupt way. So sorry if I stumble over myself. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as... Sorry, I just realized I should have said something that was quite common to do at witch trials in this period in England, was that the witch on trial would be asked to repeat the Lord's Prayer from memory. And if she couldn't do it, that was obviously taken as evidence she was a witch. Not to mind, very many of these women perhaps would have been working in fields all day, so wouldn't have been able to go to church very much, were likely illiterate, or perhaps very elderly, or even had dementia. The Lord's Prayer is quite a difficult thing to remember. So that this scene is about an elderly woman being asked to recite the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our trespasses as... See, she cannot, the witch cannot say it, the witch, the word of God sticks in her craw, the good word, why are her eyes like that, unwholesome, like something baked in its own skin in the sun, imagine licking a rotten, where they ripen and fall in secret, rotten in a mouth. Forgive us our trespasses as... There must be signification, it is not difficult after all, a child knows it, my daughter, my 4-year-old, can count upon their hands the rings of gold, click her fingers and turn the fleet to frothing blood. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy... And why singest thou psalms, my love, when thou knowest thyself to be a damned creature? And just like that, a handsome face, a jagged hoof set on the edge of the milk pail. It cannot be ignored, and neither would you. You would take it in your mouth. The truth is, he likes girls and women, truly. They are steeped in story and also violets, a sweet life song. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come forever and ever. And the truth is, it was different last night, seemed to want it more. Spirited, avid, jagged. What was she thinking about? Damned if I know, never. says she dreamed of walking through the white gardens of heaven when she came by a heart resting on an outcrop of cloud, and pushed it, having within her a strange and sudden urge to destroy, to see it topple, down through the sky like a morning star, which is, after all, the meaning of that name, the meaning of the name Lucifer.
Wow.
Oh, hi, Christina.
Hello. So there's a question here that is a little bit about that. Like, can you share a little about your formation as a poet? Someone would like to know.
Yeah. So I started writing poetry when I was in my sort of mid-teens, maybe about 14 or 15. And I don't think I would have continued writing it into my adult life if I had not been fortunate enough to have won a competition, which is it's quite a big kind of youth poetry competition in the UK called For Young Poets of the Year. There are 15 winners every year, and I was one of them in 2006 and 2007. So that was sort of a massive vindication. And also in terms of kind of the culture it put me in touch with was not something that I think I ever would have been able to find on my own. And then I suppose, so I never studied creative writing formally. I have an undergrad degree in English literature and language, but it's all kind of been off my own back, really. Writing. I won another competition that led to the publication of my first book in 2015, and then my second in 2018. But I suppose it's hard to speak of to sort of my formation as a poet because to an American audience, the scene in England is completely different. It's I suppose poetry is sort of a cottage industry almost here. I've heard it described as. We don't really have poets who perhaps reach the level of sort of fame seems like the wrong word, but say of like a Jericho Brown or a Dana Smith. It just doesn't really happen. So yeah, I haven't written a poem in a long time now, so I almost don't think of myself as a poet anymore. But I do. But I'm working on novel number 2 now, and poetry just isn't happening for me at the moment.
Actually, there's a question about what are you working on next? So that's another one.
Well, there we go. I can 2 birds with 1 stone, and then leave its wing in Amy Q's garden to be covered in slugs. I'm currently working on novel number 2. It's all kind of very early days, so I don't want to say too much about it in case it completely changes, or in case we can't sell it to a publisher and then it's really embarrassing because I've told everyone about it. So all I will say is that it's more historical fiction, but it's set in a very different part of the world, and about 140 years later than the Manningtree Witches, and it involves a lot more research. so yeah, that's what I'm working on.
Will it be published by Catapult as well?
But it's not even at that stage yet. I haven't got a book deal. Yeah, everyone might hate it.
I doubt that.
So yeah, it's very, very early stages. Yeah.
So any books or films that were influential?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So I read quite a lot of history, obviously, and I've already mentioned Silvia Federici, whose kind of career, she is a Marxist historian of witchcraft, and she's very interesting on the way that witchcraft and witch hunts sort of corresponded with the growth of capitalism and the growth of property rights, and how witch hunts became a way of controlling women, particularly women who weren't economically useful anymore. So that's really interesting, and her work was something that was very prominent in my mind when I was writing. I really, really loved Stacy Schiff, The Witches, which is her book about the Salem witch trials. And obviously Salem was much later and a completely different vibe in many ways. But what she is amazing at describing, and was very a touchstone in the way that I thought about writing about the community and the physical world they lived in, was Stacy Schiff is really brilliant on the eeriness of what the texture of life must have been like living in a frantic and kind of paranoiac Puritan community, where there was an incredible loneliness to the way you lived your life, a silence, a quietness, a darkness, you know, by candlelight, with only your very close family around you, being able to hear a dog barking 3 villages over, but also an insane intimacy when you would have entire families living in one room. You'd be able to hear mice scratching in the walls. You'd be able to hear your sister giggling kind of through the reed door, and wonder what that was about. So I really loved her work for that. And it's a sort of obvious one, but my favorite film about witch trials is The Witch, like almost definitely. And in terms of the authenticity of the dialogue and something and things, it was, I suppose, an inspiration in terms of it sort of showed me or sort of affirmed to me the feeling that you could aim for authenticity, like period authenticity of that level, and not have it distracting from atmosphere and from the impact of the imagery.
Such a great film. Such a great film. In fact, I was thinking of rewatching it based on this conversation. Before you mentioned it, I was thinking, oh, maybe I should rewatch that tonight. Would be interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think I've even seen it.
It's really good. I haven't seen it in a very long time because my partner really doesn't like horror films. And I'm kind of like, it's not actually that scary. It was just a bit with a crow on a boob, but that's probably the scariest bit, the crow boob jump scare. But other than that, it's sort of more moody than scary.
Moody, very moody, but so well done.
Okay, it's brilliantly done.
Oh, amazing. Do you remember the director's name? Because I can't remember off the top of my head.
Ooh, no, I can't off the top of my head. Eggers? Is it Eggs? He also did the Lighthouse one that came out recently.
Okay, I think you're right. That's right.
I can't remember. But also, I just remembered, if you like The Witch and you want to watch something else sort of set in this period, I can also recommend A Field in England, which is sort of it's a very, very strange English Civil War film, which sort of touches on Satan and witchcraft around the edges. It's about 3 soldiers who are convinced that there is gold buried under a field, and turn to the dark arts to try and sort of scry out its location.
That sounds really, I've never heard of it, so thank you, because I love, just knowing about something I've never encountered. Have you ever seen a film called The Sorceress? It's a French film.
The Sorceress? No.
Mm-hmm. It's about a woman who is a natural healer, and of course she's persecuted by a priest that comes into the village in the Middle Ages. It's very old, but it's really well done.
Okay.
So here's one more. We'll take one more question. What is it about human psychology that continues to surface throughout history to allow for violence and othering? A light question to end with.
Wow.
But it's
Gosh. I feel like sort of answering that, maybe in some ways slightly beyond my scope as a novelist. I 100% do not believe that kind of territoriality and the violence that comes with that. And I don't believe that to fear the other is inherent to human nature, because I know some people do believe that. There's this sort of, you know, I don't know if it's the same in America. I imagine probably, but often it's particularly older people in the UK will justify racist attitudes by saying, oh, well, it's just natural to prefer people who are like you, or something like that. Or you know, I do not believe that we are inherently afraid of people who are different from us. And I think that the techniques by which we are taught to be afraid, by which we learn to be afraid of people who are different from us, have been around a very long time and have often been used throughout history for very similar ends, which is often for those who already have power to be elevated further up the chain, and for those who are at the bottom to be pushed off entirely, or controlled more effectively. Well, and both of those things mean that the people in the middle can be controlled more effectively. So I think that is why I don't think it's about human psychology particularly at all. I think it's about the needs for social control.
Yeah, you know, it's so kind of insidious in the machinery of the state. And
I remember hearing Margaret Atwood talking about, they were asking her about The Handmaid's Tale, and she said something like, everything in this book has happened in the world.
Yeah.
Like, I created a tale, but it's all based on history. It's all real.
Yeah.
Which was terrifying.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about that the other day. I can't remember why, but yeah, she said, you know, it's called a dystopia, but every single thing that happens in it is something that's happened at some point in history somewhere in the world. And she made that a rule for herself, that she wouldn't make anything up entirely. Yeah. So that's, I hope I've gestured at an answer to that in simply enormous question.
You have. Thank you so much. So I just want to thank both of you for joining us, for supporting independent bookstores, for being here with us in our little virtual bookshop, for appearing and disappearing and working to come back and join us. And I want to thank everyone that's watching who actually stayed on, which is really, you know, says something about their desire to listen and to be a part of this. So just thank you so much. And just reminder to everyone, if you don't have your copy of the Manningtree Witches, you can get it by just pressing on the green button at the bottom of the screen or coming to one of our stores in Miami. We have copies there. And this is a book that you should definitely read, enjoy, savor, laugh through, cry through, just be a part of. So thank you very, very much. And if there are any last thoughts or any?
I don't think so. Thank you so much. I'm really deeply sorry for the technical issues and my exhaustion, which is that.
What
made
time?
me a bit
What time is
inarticulate.
it now in England?
It's just coming up to 8 p.m.
Okay,
in London.
it's
Yeah,
maybe dinner time. Hopefully,
dinner time. Yes, I'm going to
Nice.
have some fajitas and watch Drag Race. I've been so busy over the past few days, I haven't caught up with Thursday's Drag Race. And my cat is asleep in her little box just next to me here.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
It's been a very stressful day for them.
But she's settling in, or he or she
They're
is settling.
There are two of them. My boy cat's on the sofa over there, but they're settling in,
That's great.
which is nice. So
Wow.
my familiars.
Best wishes for lots of happiness and lots of great writing in your new home.
Thank you. Oh, Sam's come to say hello.
Ah.
There he is.
Oh.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, then. Good night or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where
Good
you
night.
are.
Good night. Thank you for
Bye,
listening.
everyone.